both online and virtual, and please note, Councilman Johnson here. Johnson is here as an alternate for Councilman Washington, who had other engagements tonight. Why do you give me that vote?
We don't have alternates.
Well, as substitute.
We've had a big fight about not having substitutes and practices. We don't do that. There's a certain council member recommendation.
Okay, let's run with it. We'll talk. Let's talk afterwards. Sorry.
What? I object.
You object?
Yes. He's not on the committee.
I'm willing to stand down if that is the desire of the committee.
Okay, I do want to have a conversation
I
afterwards.
love his presence, would love his input, but he's not on the committee.
Okay. All right, please note, Councilor Washington's absence and attendance of Mayor and Councilman Mayhew in attendance, as well as staff. With that, we will move on to approval of the agenda. Of note, I would like to make one order change. Due to traffic, I would like to pull the quarterly report up on the agenda and do the Railroad Museum after quarterly report. All right.
It'd be all right if we also just had a brief discussion about the topic of utility rates. Beep, beep, beep.
Is that your blood pressure?
It's
Okay, can we add?
mostly teeing up something for future discussion.
Okay, so we'll put that at the end of discussion, utility rates?
Yeah.
All right. But with that, let's unless there are objections, we'll move with the agenda as stated there. Let's first move into approval of the minutes dated July 5, 2023. Chair has no questions, comments, or revisions. Councilor Mayhew has none. With that, we will take the minutes as presented as approved. And move on to the next, which I shouldn't have touched that link because it drove me down there. All right. Approval of warrants and claims, consideration of claims approval report delayed July 24, 2023. I've received no questions or inquiries in email, and I personally have no questions or queries. All right, lesser objections, we'll take the claims report dated July 24, 2023 as presented as approved. Hearing no objections, we are approved. With that, let's go ahead and move on into discussion. Item number 4, first quarter financial reports.
So good evening, council. Thank you for having us here today. Based on the last discussion at the last committee meeting, we produced basically a quarterly report, which is what you have in front of you. Jenna Walker, our budget analyst, has done a lot of work on this fairly recently. We expect to have further conversation about what you like, what you don't like about this. But I've got Jana here in order to provide a presentation. She's behind the scenes maestro, basically, that makes us all look good in the finance and HR department. And so with that said, this is really her first presentation in front of council. And so I'd like to welcome her up and thank you.
Thank you, Drew. As he said, my name is Jana Walker, budget analyst, and this is our first go at a quarterly review, a full document, I should say. You will also see the first appendix is the spreadsheet that you saw historically that will have all the funds, all the details that you're used to seeing. And the rest of this is just kind of added on more information to help you determine how we're doing as compared to the budget. We cover city funds, the general fund. Oh, goodness, it's.
Yeah. You're on a roll though.
Thank you. Okay, we'll go over quarter one fund balances, and then there are some financial metrics that the State Auditor's Office of Washington recommends for cash basis reporting. So before I dive into all the numbers, there are 3 repeating themes that you're going to see throughout this report that'll affect how we are doing as compared to the budget. The first is that in the first quarter, we haven't received any property taxes, and that's a big chunk of our revenue for the general fund. So you'll see the effect of that as we compare to the revenue, anticipated revenues. Secondly, capital funds revenues are low. These aren't as regular as some of the general fund expenses and revenues where we have similar amounts every month or every quarter. They're really dependent on project progress and getting grant receipt based on that progress. And then finally, general facility charges, which are part of the utility capital fund. We estimated those to be about $3.2 million. We haven't received any yet. We expect some from the Snoqualmie tribe sewer utility agreement. Maybe about a quarter of those will come from the Snoqualmie tribe, and the rest of that is dependent on growth, our growth estimates, and what actually is able to occur during this biennium. So you'll see the effect of that on some of these comparisons. So revenues, what we're looking at here, the first three columns are all budget numbers. Our fourth column is the actual, what's occurred this first quarter. And the next two are the percent of budget. Now for the 2023 percent of budget, 25% would be the expected norm or the average amount. For the 2023-24, then 12.5% would be our expected. So I've highlighted things that are outside of for revenues. If they're low, they're highlighted red. I'm not going to go over all of the red ones though. If it's larger than 5%, I'll discuss some of those. So general fund, we'll talk about in just a moment. Capital project funds, as we discussed, some of those like the Snoqualmie Parkway project that's underway right now. We will start billing the state of Washington to receive some of those funds. There are other things like that. I know that a Department of Commerce for the Riverwalk has come in after the quarter. So that amount is low, but it's not cause for panic. The utilities funds revenue is also low. And as we discussed on the last slide, that's because of the general facility charges. I don't think I went over those. You probably are all familiar with that term. It's basically, oh, I see the nods. I'm going to say it anyways. When growth happens, when somebody links into our sewer system, our water system, they pay charges so that they are part of the system. They've paid for the infrastructure. Expenditures for the funds are right on line, as we see in the 2023 percent of budget. General funds are a little bit high, and we will discuss that as we separate general funds into more of their categories. You can see right here for revenues, property taxes very low at 3.8%. That's to be expected. That occurs every year. We collect in the second and fourth quarters of the year. Some other lower areas, intergovernmental grants falls a little bit lower than we would expect. However, those are usually one-time payments that we receive based on performance of grant agreements. The other two are smaller amounts, so I'm not going to go into those. You can certainly ask questions though as we move forward. Expenditures for general funds, the administration, which is mostly what occurs in this building, is a little bit high. That is because we pay our general insurance premium the very first part of the year. If we were to separate that out into quarters, that amount would fall to 25%, right where we would expect it to be. And that's an annual payment. So the general fund, the administration really isn't out of whack if you consider it in a quarterly fashion. The other that's a little bit higher is non-departmental. And that covers our human services funds, some annual dues. Those are things that aren't paid monthly, but paid once a year or twice a year. We've already paid at least half on some of those and some for the full year. And if you adjust those on a quarterly basis rather than how we actually pay them, that also falls down, I think, to 26%, 25%, 26%, somewhere much closer to where we would expect it to be. This slide is our fund balances. You can see the general funds are lower than, or have lowered a lot in one quarter, and that is because we haven't received that property tax revenue yet. Special revenue funds are also a little bit lower than you might expect. There's the fund balances includes transfers out, which are the more automatic kind of parts of of expenditures. They're staying within the government, but within the city, but not within the fund. And then the other part of that is the North Bend service fee for police service. We received that right after the end of the quarter. So that decrease isn't unexpected. It's fully normal part of city operations. Next slide are some of the city's financial metrics. Cash balance sufficiency basically compares what our fund balance is to the expenses. So if we were to stop receiving any revenue, how long would our fund balance last? And the state auditor's office has determined that 60 days is sort of a benchmark guide for that. You can see that we're above that for the general fund. And that same ratio for the utility fund, also well above that. Some big decreases, of course, as we're gearing up to do large utilities projects. This includes the capital funds. So we'll see that continue to lower as we continue progress in our projects.
So, question?
Uh-huh.
Understand the guidance on 60 days. My question though is, due to the fact that we get our largest revenue source, twice during the year, it can be more than 60 days between those payments. It's like 90 days.
Yes.
Wouldn't it be more appropriate for us to have a 90-day reserve instead of a 60-day?
That's something worth considering, I guess, as we look at our cash management policy, if that's something, if we want to look at it that way.
Go ahead.
So we're gonna have some discussion. Please don't take this as criticism of your work. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Also, your presentation is fantastic. So please accept all this, understanding it's not criticism of you or anything. You're saying great work,
Absolutely.
okay? Especially since we just asked for this a couple weeks ago and you guys jumped right on it. So we know that, and that's great. Having said that, I think frankly, I could give a rat's tail what the state's auditor's office says in terms of some generic guideline for some generic cash basis city that would equally apply to one of the other 2,000 cities, that maybe has 200 residents. It's just not. So we went through an enormous amount of work last year. And we set our policies for these reserves. So I think what we should do is compare what we've got to our policy. And I think we should disregard comparisons to some generic. Now, if the state auditors made a specific recommendation for our city, then I'm interested in that recommendation. But a generic one, I just don't think it's worth your time or ours. Yeah.
Okay.
So let's compare it to our policy
reserve
where we all
policy.
put a lot of work into coming up with that. And let's see how we're doing there.
Okay.
I think that would address.
Well, and I think our policy is at a higher level than the state. So, yeah.
And it's very well thought out. And I think it's just comparing, hey, how are we doing about, against what we are intending to do and budget to do and so forth, I think would be really, really valuable. So same discussion, just different metric to compare, different comparison point.
Absolutely. Okay, we'll take that to heart. On that note, I could continue scrolling through the financial metrics, or maybe you would rather see it as
No, keep going.
compared to our, yeah,
Keep going.
okay. Another metric that they look at is change in cash position. So comparing our end balance to our previous end balance. Certainly a negative change doesn't look good, but if we're doing proper governance, then it shouldn't always be positive. That would mean that we're overtaxing and probably underserving our infrastructure. So certainly a big negative for this. And I should mention, sorry, this is 2023 forecasted. This is not Q1 2023 for this. Some big changes that affect that. $2.5 million we transferred into our non-utilities capital fund is one of the big ones for that. For utilities, it's hard to tell, but that's actually a decrease of 13% there. Change in cash position, which represents, I think, $3 million, which is suspiciously similar to our GFC amount. And the final metric is governmental funds sustainability. And for this one, we're comparing our revenues to our expenses and saying whether our revenues are covering our ongoing expenses. For this particular metric, we took out the one-time expenses in the budget, in the 2023 budget. And we're right on target if we don't include those one-time expenditures. And then finally, we have the
Sorry,
utility.
Grace, governmental funds is just the operating fund or it includes capital funds?
So governmental fund sustainability. Oh, I was looking at utility. Sorry. So general fund is the first chart.
Got it?
And our second chart is utility funds, which includes.
Oh,
capital.
utility. Thank you very much.
So this one you can see once again, governmental funds sustainability is about just over $3 million decrease over sustainability. We make those decisions though very consciously in the budget process and the capital utilities CIP process to spend down that fund balance. And then finally, looking forward, some big projects coming up, design work for the community center. The construction of the Snoqualmie Parkway project, which we've heard discussed earlier this evening, and the construction of water reclamation facility phase 3 is about to commence. And that concludes our quarterly presentation. And you asked some questions. I'm sure you have more at now or at a later date.
Well, the intent is to review this also at council in a week. I don't know if I have no further questions for you.
Yeah, I do. So again, great work, especially getting us caught up. That's just great. I think maybe there's some missing quarters. I assume you guys are going to backfill those when you get to them. But anyway, that's
For 2022.
fantastic that you got to this. Yes. So this does a great job of highlighting some of the concerns I tried to share when we talked about what would go into this report and kind of what would be useful in it and so on. So if we just sort of think about a lot of your report, almost all of your report, now this is my summarization, not yours. So if you don't like how I say it, it's okay. Say that that's not fair. But a lot of your report basically tells us, so let me back up. We're a cash basis taxpayer, not taxpayer, record keeper, cash basis reporter. So the cash basis is, for an operation like ours, very misleading because of all the reasons you just highlighted. Well, the cash comes in here, but we don't spend when property taxes get paid twice a year and they come to us twice a year, but we spend all during the year. So fund balance is going to pop up, then it's going to go down. And if you then actually apply that into a sustainability ratio, you're going to get really bad conclusions, which is what some of those ratios, I think you were kind of struggling to say, well, you know, here's what this shows, but really here's what's going on. And my point would be, I just don't think that's a very useful conversation. I appreciate your doing it, but I think the question that I have, and I would think the council has, and frankly, the question I think that residents would have is, hey, are we okay with budget or not? And so I think I looked at one of your tables. So there's a general fund revenue table on page 2. And in there you listed Q4 forecasted. So you dropped in, hey, here's where I think we're going to be at the end of the year. If I understand this correctly, that's what you're saying.
Yes.
But then the percentages don't really key off of that. They went back to the Q1, at
Correct.
least as I understood it. I think the Q1 is just not worth talking about in terms of our, percentages, because revenues just don't behave like that from a cash perspective. So I think if we instead did all of this comparison to the forecast, then I think we're locked in on things that matter. Hey, right now we're forecasting we're going to be in budget,
Okay.
below budget, or above budget. Okay, we think we're going to be above budget here. Here's what's going on there. Perhaps here's a discussion what we're doing about it, or maybe we don't have a discussion. We just say, hey, here's what we see coming. So then I think we're using these reports to sort of get the council aware of what, of course, me just back up. Of course, the people managing these budgets, of course, you guys, I could ask you a bunch of questions about these and you'd know the answers. I know that. But the point here is how to convey that at a high level. Hey, no need to worry, or there is need to worry, but just here, just kind of tune us into that. And I think what happened in Q1 is just always going to mislead us. Now, that's less so on expenditures, but only for general fund expenditures, right? And it's still a bit misleading because not all expenditures occur 1/12 every month, do they? Some of them happen in chunks during the year. So therefore, unless you're looking at where you think you're going to end up the whole year, you're just always going to get, you're going to get noise, if you will, that then you have to spend time explaining. And I think people get confused. Well, but are we okay or not? And I think the real answer is, hey, if we're okay, if we're going to be okay for the year, if that's what our forecast is, let's say that, and let's move on. I think rather than sort of go through the details of why the bank account's up or down because of timing of when somebody paid their property taxes. So I'd really encourage us to take this, and so let me back up. So therefore, when I look at this, I basically am walking away from this without really knowing if we're in good shape or not, or bad shape, and if we're in trouble anywhere where I can't tell. And I'm not the average resident. I'm actually someone who has done this for a living my whole career, and I can't figure it out. So there's just not enough here. So I'd really encourage us to think about really switching this to looking at the forecast. Folks, yeah, tell us where we're at for the quarter. By the way, you're required to by state law. So you know, let's fulfill the law, but let's focus all the discussion on, hey, are we on track or not? And if not, here's where we're not. Hopefully that makes sense. That's with general fund. With respect to capital funds, I think sort of looking at ins and outs on capital funds is completely confusing. I wouldn't present that information almost at all. What's really relevant on capital funds is, you know, are we spending to our appropriation? And is there any concern about the sources? Because the sources for capital funding happen over long periods, 5 to 10 years. So what happened this year, you know, the fact that we may spend more in capital funds this year than we bring in, well, if that's our plan, that has no significance to our financial health at all. We're just simply following plan. So let's not sort of imply there's, oh, that this is potentially worse. Well, no, it isn't. I think we've misled people by saying that. So capital funds, I would just say, are we on track or not? Are we over budget on anything? Do we foresee any problem on the revenue? So the one thing that I thought I heard in here was that we may be in trouble on capital fund revenues. But I think it was in the, not capital funds, utility funds. Because I thought I heard that we don't have line of sight right now on to how we're going to hit the budget for GFCs. That's utility fund, right? And so if right now we don't see, like, we know what building permits are in, we get a pretty good idea what GFCs are going to come in this biennium. I think we have a really good idea what's going to come in this year. So if we're in trouble on GFCs, like, let's not wait to find that out a year and a half from now. Let's start seeing that now and saying, okay, what do we need to do to react to that? Now, often in utility funds, the reaction is, okay, well, let's just sort of reorder some projects, push them out a little bit, but let's just do that. This is easy to manage if we just manage. If we wait until it's crashed in on our head, then we're sort of panicking, right? So, sorry, I went on for a bit. I think it's recorded, so maybe you can go back. Hopefully I was clear. But I think great effort, but I think it really doesn't get us where we need to do. And I think we as council members, we just want to know at a fairly high level, are we okay, or is there cause for concern somewhere? And if there isn't cause for concern somewhere, then great, thanks for the report, let's move on. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I think you could help us get there
Yep.
a different way. Hopefully those comments are useful.
Thank you.
I'll just go over a few of the points. Thank you for the feedback. I think we need that. I do appreciate what Jana has done because in the previous quarterly reports, you have not seen any sort of forecast. And so this is very brand new. And to a certain extent, we are moving the needle a little bit. We just probably need to get that over the line. Because we're kind of maybe stuck in between two different places where the past and what people normally expect to see in a quarterly report isn't exactly what has been said here for the most part. And so we have to make sure that council kind of walks with us in that direction to actually just keeping the forecast and actually looking at the forecast of how we're going to do. As a part of that, it is generally formulaic in what we're doing with the forecast itself. We understand that, for example, parks maintenance, a lot of their expenses, for example, take place over the summer. So we will definitely be using monthly ratios in order to estimate that. And I think that's basically what we did as a part of our formula for forecasting how we're going to end up by the end of the biennium. And I guess just specifically this year, just to go back to Councilmember Hallway's comment regarding the 60 days as a benchmark. Council did adopt the financial management policy that included a reserve fund level of 15 to 20%. 60 days is roughly 16.6% and 90 days is equal to 25%. So just giving you kind of a rough sense regarding that. I think everything else was well said, and we'll certainly go back to the video to watch and can't really disagree with much of it. So with that said, I'll step aside and just one more comment. This is a very static report. When we get the Munis system in place, for example, it becomes a lot more dynamic and real time for council. We're hoping eventually to actually redirect you in that direction as opposed to having to go look at a piece of paper like this. So thank you for your time.
And if you go back and check the audio, I never liked that percentage spread, but anyway. I remember that now. All right. Thank you very much. It was a lot of good information. With that, do we have appropriate membership to talk to Pacific West Railroad Museum? Yes, sir. Pacific West Rail Model Train. Okay, that's a mouthful. All right, so let's go ahead and talk that and consider it. And particularly in consideration of potential lease activities. Okay. You here to speak on behalf?
You're talking to me, but I'll play along with it.
I'll do a little intro and then turn it over to you.
Okay.
Tonight, we have two instruments. Well, actually, there'll be three instruments that we're proposing to go to council. Two of them are in your packet. The one that's not in your packet is the gift instrument, which is between Mr. Hamling and the foundation. But so you have a ground lease instrument and you have a development agreement. We had a preview discussion about that in CD yesterday. And we wanted to bring it forward in F&A because this is a lease. There is a financial component to this. And we thought this was the appropriate committee to decide if it's mature enough to go to council. Currently, the MOU with the group expires on August 18th. We can extend that MOU. We have to discuss it, but that is a possibility. If we need more time to get these instruments right. There was some discussion last night about telling the story. We believe that the parties here tonight are going to be able to help fill in that and tell some more of that story. And we also are working on our end to provide those documents ahead of the council meeting on Monday night. So with that, let me introduce Mr. Hamling, Peter Hamling, the owner of these magnificent model trains.
I think you were going to say the owner of this madness.
Oh, I share this madness.
Yeah.
I get it.
Every time I hear the introduction, I have to say it's a little embarrassing, and I guess I'll eventually get over that. It's taking a long time. Forgive me, I don't know how much current information you have on where we've come since I spoke to you. I think it's November last year. But I'll touch it briefly. We can go through some photos here. We've formed a nonprofit, and Lori and I, my wife and I, have funded that. That's Pacific West Rail Foundation. We've hired an attorney, Jerry Johnson from Pacific Law Group, who you may know or have heard of. And we've hired an architect, Wilson Kundig. Back to the foundation, we have two board members, Jack Anderson, who is the creator of what, in my view, is one of the best design firms in the Northwest, Ronald Anderson, and a personal friend of mine, and a fellow down the street who's an absolute riot, John Hanson, and he's KBC Realty, who's done most of the real estate for Amazon. Both great guys. None of us three have really any experience running board meetings. We started a company and those two guys did too, but none of us ever did any more than sign papers. So it's kind of fun. Anyway, Jack Anderson had a house built by Tom Kundig. And through that, we were introduced to Tom. He's a great guy. And he's a legendary, and I have to say, world-class architect. Very expensive, but very quick, worth every penny. So we come a fair bit down the path with Tom. I call it the OK Corral because it's Olson Kundig. But they're great guys, and we'll show you some of the images. The biggest hill to climb, since this is finance administration, is the fundraising, and that's going to fall on my shoulders. And I'll cut to the chase. The initial, very crude, early estimate is somewhere in the neighborhood of 32 to 42 million. A lot of money. Lori and I.
Could I just ask, is that just your, so for the capital budget, is that the capital campaign?
Yeah.
Or does that include something to help future operations, or that's just the capital?
That's just the capital campaign to design, build, construct the building. We'll show you the financial projections that we put together. I tend to look at this, even though it's a nonprofit, I look at it as a business. In my view, it needs to make money, not take it. If we can get grants and assistance beyond that, great, but it needs to stand on its own 2 feet. That's how one of my requirements. And so I think once we get this built and it gets going, we'll show you the details of this. I think it can easily self-support its operations. But to be honest, raising that kind of money is a tall order. Personally, I started a company with my partner and we didn't put any money into it. We couldn't get any money. Banks wouldn't loan it, venture capital wouldn't loan it, so we just bootstrapped it. So I never went through this whole process. That said, maybe we can do it. I'll give it a try. But the bottom line is we're not asking for any money from the city, just the land. I think that's the place to put it. So yeah, this started with, I mean, I love trains. I love boats, airplanes, motorbikes, scooters. If it moves, I like it. And Lori would tell you maybe too much. But that's kind of where it started. But it really was a creative outlet for me. I've got a creative streak in me. It's a bit dangerous. But I'm not a model railroader per se. I like the guys, but it's just not me. So we started this 16 years ago. These two guys right here are two of the three crew we have full time, and they've been on this for most of that period. We built it in the basement under the house we built without a basement. So that's another funny little twist. And I'm told that we need to tell this whole story. It's a bit quirky and as I said, embarrassing. But in a nutshell, I'll kind of review a few things you may remember. It really represents about 14 locations around the Western U.S. Each of those are finished in the real dirt locations. If you walk the longest path through this serpentine under a house, you'll come back to where you started. It's a quarter mile. So it's quite an impressive layout. But for the very beginning, I made sure it was designed and built to be moved because I wanted to move it to a place where a lot of people could enjoy it. I didn't do it to play with model trains. I did it for creativity, but I really wanted to see it eventually put into museum. You may remember back maybe 12, 18 months ago, we were talking to Tacoma, Snoqualmie, Edmonds, and that's because I wanted to put it next to a real rail line. You go into an imaginary space like this, you come out, and there's a real train, whether it's BNSF or in this case, the Railroad Museum. There's this interesting connect of reality to imaginary. So to me, coupled with a lot of interest from the city of Snoqualmie, this to me is a perfect place for it. And I love coming out here. I will tell you, after spending half an hour in a Bellevue traffic jam, I really love. So, the connection, this whole process got started, because I know Bruce McCaw. And so I called Bruce about almost 2 years ago and I said, you know, I know how to start a company. I have no idea how to start a museum. And he's a great guy. He's seen the railroad, in the basement. We both love flying and we have an airplane in his hangar. So Bruce said, hey, do you know Howard Lovering? I said, no, never heard of it. Howard Lovering, just turned 88. And he was the executive director of the Flight Museum. Bruce basically is like, can summarize it, Bruce and his connections funded it. He wouldn't tell you that, but they did. And Howard made it happen. So they're very much a team. So Howard started helping us about 18 months ago. And he's very gifted. He's very, very experienced in museums and how they work and how they don't. And so he's guided us into what is now, I think, a 65-page, what we call a master business plan, which goes through in great detail the vision, what it's all about, how it's going to work, who it's going to attract, and why, how it's going to make money, and why. And we'll share that with you if you want to read 65 pages of it. It's pretty much done. I talked about our crew, David Hazelton, Rob Nelson. The only one missing is Todd Gamble. These guys all live nearby. Rob grew up in Snoqualmie, lives in North Bend. That's kind of a traitorous sort of thing, but David lives in Issaquah, Todd Gamble lives here. And so to me, to be quite honest, one of the, maybe the biggest draws to Snoqualmie is that we can move this here and these guys will stay with it. I had some discussion with Howard and a few others about wanting to move it to Tacoma. They really wanted it. And I said, first of all, I don't really like driving to Tacoma, particularly after Bellevue. And secondly, we lose these guys. And so if they're willing to stay on and they're not only willing, they're stoked about it. That to me is the biggest. I'm all about taking care of people the best way we can. I talked about Olson Kundig and you can see what that team has done. So I think all this is fairly straightforward and expected. There's a lot of railroad history here. I don't know. I've got to talk to Richard Anderson and make sure he understands we're not going to be competing with his fundraising. The way I'm going to try and raise the money is going to private donors. I know a few around the we'll see if that works. I love the location. I really didn't focus on it for a while. Rob didn't point out to me for maybe 4 or 5 years. So one day we came out here, like, wow. And we did some background and found out the history of that corner lot. In fact, they can only be used for public benefit. Kind of cool, kind of fits. But it's a great place for it. And I also like the name, by the way, Gateway. So next, let's see. Yeah, we talked about private funding. If we could get financing, yeah, I think it's pretty unlikely, very unlikely. And Lori and I, having put, by the time we're done with this, $7 million into it, we're not going to put our names on it. So I don't think that's likely. We put this here just in case, but government assistance, yes, if we get it, maybe. I'm not counting on that either. So these are some sketches that Olson, the OK Corral did. The building they've designed, which I'll show you in a minute from the outside, is basically 20,000 square foot footprint for the mezzanine. You can see this is the ground level and the mezzanine upstairs. And so what we would do is disassemble what is now in our basement. It's in about 150 sections, each of which could be moved out the stairwell. Move it here, expand it to be ADA compatible or friendly. Currently, it's not. The aisles are too narrow. The walk through to get into it is 3 inches too short. So to do that, we would go from what's now 3,700 square feet to about 7,000 to 8,000 square feet. That's what it takes to make it ADA friendly. But we want the museum gallery to be about twice that. The reason for that is that you want a museum can be kind of static in that sense, a little bit boring. you want it to grow, you want it to evolve, you want it to be kind of a living exhibit, so that when somebody sees it this year and they come back in 6 months, something's new, even if it's something small, or you maybe stage it where you have kind of a curtain and you're building something and you have an unveiling party, come over and there's a new line. So that would take it then to 15,000 square feet. Over a period of maybe 10 or 15 years. It wouldn't be happening very quick. But this kind of gives you an idea of how we envision it. The scenery, most of the scenery we have is done by Todd Gamble. This scenery you see here, we would build, Todd would build it, and we build up high enough where it would be above the mezzanine floor level. So it really have some pretty interesting dimension to it. My vision for this, in a nutshell, the closest analogy I can give you is a haunted house. By that, I mean, you walk into it, you get lost in it. There's districts, you can see this particular scene, you can see bits and pieces of something else, but not the whole thing at once. You walk through a little tunnel or a mine or something, and you're in another part of the country, see another scene. So it's a series of what Tom Kundig calls districts. And then if you go up to the mezzanine, you can see the whole thing above, looking down onto it. So this is the floor level. Next slide, if you've got it, that would be the mezzanine looking down. So the way this is pretty rudimentary, but the way we see the structure would be heavy steel, probably I-beams, black or very dark, which would remind you of railroads. So the way it's constructed, fairly simple, and the way it looks, you want to intrigue or tease out. That kind of looks like the railroad, old railroads. So you want all of your senses, your sight, your smell, your hearing, everything to feel like it's a railroad. Maybe a little bit of creosote in there. And get away with it. The mezzanine would run around the perimeter of the gallery, probably about 10 or 15 feet wide. And then it would have a center sky platform going across, sky bridge, I should say, going across the middle of it. We'll show you a picture of that in a minute. But you can see here from the mezzanine level, some of this topography, some of the scenery is built up above it. Next one, Mike. Okay, so this is one corner of the building. To the right is Snoqualmie Parkway. To the left is Railroad Avenue. It's a structure that looks to me very similar to what Tom Kundig did at the Center for the Coast, South Lake Union. We tinkered with different styles, and we wanted one that fit the lot, fit the feel of the city, but it wasn't necessarily just like a railroad, because then it would look like part of the railroad museum, which it is. It's connected to it, but it's not the same organization. So you want a little bit, and it's not the same representation. So you want a little bit different look. It has, it's a pitch roof, has the top of clear story, which was Tom's idea, Tom Kundig's idea. And I told him after I saw that that is reminiscent, should be reminiscent of an old railroad car built in 1900s. All of the Pullmans had this clear story, 1900, 1910, 20 finish. That little structure to the lower left is what we would like to move the Snoqualmie Falls Depot to this lot. Whether we can or not is another matter. If we can, for a variety of reasons I've heard, then we might build one, and that would be perhaps a stop on the railroad line. I don't know. That's just a sort of a fill in at the moment. Because the building has to be built up above the basic flood elevation. I think it's 2 or 3 feet. There has to be a way to get up to it. At the moment, this would be a bunch of some steps you can see here. We'll see a better picture in a minute. So the building has to be raised up, and that's what those are for. Okay, Mike, next one. So this bird's eye view of how it sit on the property, we played with a number of different orientations, one of which was closer to the parkway, one of which was back against the trees. Problem with that could be that you'd have to average the buffer, which might take time and might not be even achievable. So we decided, rather than pushing it back, push it closer, but not too close to the parkway. And from that position upstairs, you get the best view of through the trees and outside. Now, of course, if it's up against the trees, which is what I originally thought, and actually Tom Kundig originally thought would be best. You can't really get a view from the outside. So this is just a first cut of how it would sit on the property, on the lot. Parking would be behind, under or near those trees. We're currently working through how many parking places we need based on how much capacity the building has. And you can see the railroad museum line on the right there. Let's see, next one, Mike. So this is a closer view of what the ground floor would look like. And what you see on the left here is basically the layout we have taken apart in small pieces, put back together in big sections, and then big sections are moved around. It's hard to describe without seeing it, but when you go into the basement we have now, you're in the middle of it looking out. The problem with that is fire escape. So what we had this epiphany of an idea a while ago. Why don't we take that and turn the whole thing inside out? It's what I call inside out or outside in. So now the layout is in the middle and you're walking around the outside of it. So for example, that big section on the right, which is yellow, that is currently the lower yard in the existing layout. This is simply taken apart pieces, put back together the same way. It's one big long section. I think it's about 60 feet. Remember, is that right? It's pretty big. So a number of these pieces are what you would see now, reassembled, and then just in different orientations. What you're seeing here also is future expansion. So the upper left, where you can see that squiggly red line, that would be a new section. Yeah, there you go. Thanks, Mike. That would be a new section we might build 5 years later. So my only point of that is we've thought about how do we take it from what it is now, reassemble, and move it to something that's a bit bigger and a bit more dimensional later over time. On the right are facilities, entrance, lobby, restrooms. The right side of this is sort of in motion a little bit. We're trying to figure out, for example, do we need a theater? What we have included, and this came early from the city, was to, in some fashion, put a visitor center at the bottom. What I'd like to not do is have a visitor center with a stack of pamphlets. So what we can talk about it, but I said absolutely, particularly since it's such a, as you call it, a big project. It needs to look like the entrance as well. So this is where we currently are with Olson Prendig. It's a little bit fluid, but based on this, that's where they came up. They came up with the estimate of 2 contractors, 30 people. Thank you.
For a long time.
So I'll be quite honest.
You noticed my poker face when you said that
Yeah,
number.
I won't tell you what I said that's being recorded, but yeah. So anyway, I'm just being quite honest. It's a pretty steep building. So in the development agreement that Mike referred to, as he would put it quite cleverly, there are these off ramps. One of the off ramps is we'll try to raise the money, but we can't. Questions that probably I will. Let's see what's next. Yeah, this is a quick line drawing of what that end. This is the end of the building that's nearest Railroad Avenue, and there would be a cantilever piece out, and then there, and upstairs that would be an outdoor deck. So we've designed it not just for the railroad, the model railroad itself, but for events. Big deal. And so I've said, okay, corral needs to be capable of 200 people-ish, maybe even more than that. And that event space would probably be mostly, if not all, upstairs. Wouldn't be easy to hold it downstairs in the layout, although you could do that. But I think upstairs there's room for tables, catering, auctioneers. That corner is what you're seeing there. That's the part where you get some view of the outside. Next one, Mike, let's see. Yeah, and there's another better view of it. Architecture to me is, it's very subjective, very personal. So, and I cautioned this when I presented this to the city a month ago, so ago. I love it. Just because I love it doesn't mean everybody else is gonna love it. I would never have come up with this, but I think it's very typical. Tom, his style is very simple. It's very clean. It's very, in some respects, very modern, but not garish. So, in my own personal opinion, I think it's really cool, but I can't talk anybody else. I can't try to. But here you see the steps. There's another way to do this without the steps where there would be a ramp. I think these are more interesting. They're more expensive. That's the downside. Right there, lower right, you can see that's the entrance. That's closest to the corner of the parkway. Lower avenue, yeah. And lower left, there would be the museum store. Yeah, in the middle would be the stairwell up. Or the main staircase up, and then the upper left there is the outdoor balcony. We wouldn't have a restaurant in it, but we would have catering facilities. And let's see what's next. One more lines. Yeah, okay, so it's hard to read from where you guys are sitting, but you can see this in more detail in the handout. I set up the structure for this exactly like I did for the business 30 years ago, meaning you give it 5 years. And ideally you want a high and a low in the middle. And the business plan in any company or any project like this, it's never gonna turn out the way the plan says to start with that. But all you're really doing is you're trying to figure out the sensitivities of the dynamics of the business. So I set up the structure. I plugged in a bunch of numbers, which are pretty crude. But Rob and David took the time, a lot of time actually, a lot of experience in looking, and with Howard's help, refined these. And I think these numbers are pretty believable. So it builds to 85,000 a year in year 5. Howard's his view on this is that we could easily do that. We'll see. I don't know. It's better to be realistic and conservative, and we do better than that. Sky high. It's interesting, when we were first talking to Tom Kunde, we went down to the Tillman Museum. It's a similar kind of structure. And he said one of the problems that nobody anticipated is what happens when you get the city's really bad. You have to have rent-a-cops, you have to have traffic coordination. People get upset, fix the car. And he said it's quite staggering what happens. So is this too many? I don't think so, but it could be understated. But it is something to think about, is what happens for overflow. Back to the development agreement. So do the steps once the building is constructed. Then Lori, I would gift to the foundation, Westfield Foundation, and then that organization would be some form of partnership. Would stay on the board if we were asked to. But at a bottom line, we back out of it. So this is just back up one mic.
Oh,
So
sorry.
that's okay. Yeah. If you can't, don't worry about it. Yeah, so this just goes through sort of the sources of revenue, whether it's visitors, memberships, events, and so on. Field trips, you can see how those break down and what kind of numbers we're talking about. And then it goes into how many staff we would need to run this over the 1 through 5 years. Then into the expenses. These are all expenses we can guess at. I mean, things like insurance, that's the wild card. For the most part, we give what it shows is by year 5, it's making pretty decent profit. And then the last slide, but yeah, this is the, again, highly detailed can't read it from where you guys sit, but pretty detailed timeline of what happened. That's- Okay.
It's cool.
I don't think I can add anything more that you guys have. Covered them all. Yeah. I hope we get a better grade than the gal. He's got a real good one.
Not that you're competitive. All right.
I will say that there are some things that we're looking at, such as being able to pull out of the parking lot and head to the right turn only. We don't know if that'll work out, but that would drive a lot of business into downtown Snoqualmie. Right now, so many people go to the falls, back up the parkway. In the downtown Snoqualmie. That's a really interesting point. Is there not a divider where that? So I was guessing where that entrance was based on where the current entrance is, and I thought it was actually, it looked below, it looked like in the area where there's a divider, so you wouldn't be able to make a left turn. Is that wrong?
The entrance from Snoqualmie Parkway.
Yes,
There's no, the median is open. So you can
Yeah, it's open right there.
it's open there.
But then we look at, this shows it right here, actually. Sure. So if you look on the lower right-hand corner.
Oh, it's
where
the
the
open
exit
part.
drive is, yep, there's where you come in off the parkway.
Mhm.
But if we can bring traffic through to the museum and then exit out where it says exit drive and turn right. That'd be
Yeah.
a right-hand turn only.
It's the real, it's nothing to do with us. It has.
It's
to
a
do with-
Richard Anderson.
Yeah.
Well, it's not him.
potential-
It's the fact that it's a railway and there's. We actually used to have that because you can see there's actually an entrance there. It's got a gate over it. We had to close it because so we used to allow people to come in through there for the tree lot, they do every November, December. And that was just huge objections from the, I'm gonna say the railroad people, but by which I mean, I'm not sure if it's federal or
Federal.
state. I think it's federal. And there's just laws that say, no, you can't do that. So it got to the point where they were like, it was about to become a very, like we pushed as far as we could, just, they will not permit those rails to be crossed.
If we found the funds for crossing gates for safety. is
That
that
I don't know.
something?
So that I don't know if there were crossing gates with that, then one assumes that would work, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know the details of that. I just know why it ended up getting closed. So there is sort of a thing to overcome in that regard.
So
Yeah.
we bounce back and forth because we know, Todd Gamble, one of our senior artists, lives just down the street here, and some of the streets use just railroad crossing,
Right.
which it's confusing to why some areas can use it and others can't. But we looked into the idea of could we, if we found funding for crossing gates, is that something that could open up that idea? But that's something obviously to explore. But
Right.
we love the idea of being able to drive more people into downtown because as we've talked to so many people, when the train's running, downtown is bustling. And growing up here, I know that when it's not running, business is very slow sometimes in downtown. So we're hoping that being open and driving that traffic in could be a solution.
So that all sounds great. 100% agree with your perspective on that. We, of course, are all going to love that
Yeah.
perspective. For what it's worth, you may also want to know that even if traffic goes back out onto the parkway, allowing a left turn there is likely to create a huge problem. Trying to find a gap where you can get across. So there's a visibility problem because it's so wide.
Yeah.
And so when traffic's coming from the left and then you're trying to, so what'll happen is you may get big backups of people trying to get out because some of the front's trying to turn left. Now you can solve those 2 lanes, but anyway, there's a lot of people trying to turn left. The reason I'm aware of that is because as you go up the parkway, we have some neighborhoods that have streets that open up on the parkway, and the folks that live there report to us regularly on how difficult it is for them, especially in rush hour, whether that's the morning rush hour or the evening rush hour, how hard it is for them to get across. In fact, there have been some campaigns by neighborhood groups to try and have us put in stoplights to enable them to get across. And without going into all the detail, it turns out you can't just do that. There's rules that govern when you can and can't have stoplights. So the point just is, you know, even if you were gonna let them out back up on the parkway, it would likely be something where we'd want to look at, could we just force a right turn only? And maybe we could be of assistance in that regard.
The plan we've worked with now, OK Corral's worked with, is to thread the traffic through and
Yeah.
back out on the parkway, because we can't count on that access program.
But we may be able to assist with requiring right turn only.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I don't know, but we could, it's certainly worth discussing.
If you follow Highway 2, Stevens Pass, and a lot of that follows Stevens Pass, there's a lot of places where they have a crossing. And there's no lights, there's no signals, anything. It just says, watch out, basically. of the road.
Those trains are going much
Yeah,
faster than
they're
our
doing
5-mile-an-hour excursion train.
So how can they do it there? They can't do
Some
it.
of those may be grandfathered in existing before the regs, as long as you don't touch them,
Sure.
they're okay. Touch them, the regs come into effect and require you to do other things. I saw your hand up, Mr. Chambliss.
Yeah, your Parks and Public Works Director looks forward to working directly with the applicant to resolve any train crossing improvement concerns. And also, I'm sure this change of use would require a right hand out.
I was trying not to get ahead of myself and say that, but yes. Good.
I'm not used to this fun being called the applicant.
Sometimes that's better than the public Parks and Public Works Director.
Yeah. The other thing I'll add.
Well, you kicked them out, they're not me.
Not long ago, Kelly and my wife, Mark Mullen, and Mark, we talked about this, and that was in the vein of, well, the tribe is a wild card, how we invite them. I should say, yeah, just put out all of them, say, you help us with something. He pointed out, which none of us ever thought of, if you have that exit there and you turn right, that's the way past the casino.
Yeah, that's true. It's
Bit far, but okay.
Well, yeah,
Your GPS will now start navigating. you at that
Yeah.
Point to, if you want to get back to the freeway.
yeah, it's the whole tribal perspective, the Snoqualmie tribe's perspective on this is complicated
it is.
because their view from a historical perspective of whether railroads were a good thing for their tribe or a bad thing. And they have a point of view on that, and which then colors, or it's not the word I want, color, influences their thinking on all things railroad. So it's a tough discussion, but it's, you know, one has to have them and work through it.
Everything, sure.
Yeah, go ahead, Councilman Johnson.
Thank you. It's also, at least currently 202 is a state highway. So you're going to be dealing with the state there. And I would wonder if having the cars turn right when they're going on to 202 could help with traffic flow from their perspective. So you're not causing problems. Snoqualmie Parkway may also become a state highway, turning into Highway 18. So it could be that by the time that this comes to fruition, you'd be dealing with the state. And actually in our conversations presently, that could come up. I don't know. Administration deal with that. The other thing that turning right onto 202 does is it sends folks toward Stone Quarry Road, which is where the other rail museum is located. So yeah,
And we've
it could
discussed
help.
lots of signage possibly for that too, because
Let's go that way.
as Peter's talked a lot about, we need the Northwest Railway Museum to be functioning. We need that train to come by because that's what ties this all together. So we really want to drive people into downtown and to Stone Quarry Road to visit that establishment.
I think I asked the question, I'm not sure who asked it, but for a cool $750,000. Signal crossing. Maybe that's state funded.
It may be if you talk to Richard Anderson, you may discover there's a lot of federal funding for those kind of things.
Yeah.
I think that the Councilor Holloway, you probably know the railroad crossing just down the block right there where I'm pointing, I think was put in the not too distant.
This one,
past.
that one,
I think
he
it was this
received
one.
federal funding for one of
He
them.
received federal funding that paid for that. So there's some other sources that might be of help for the railroad crossing.
I think that if we could do it, that would add yet another anchor of reality, rather than seeing that there's a real problem. There was a steam train.
Mr. Shambles?
We are currently working with Mr. Anderson on 2 federal grants that we've already received for King Street and the Parkway. So
For railroad crossing.
correct.
Uh-huh. So Mr. Chambliss knows something about it as well.
Another thing is, speaking as a parent here, sometimes we run out of goldfish. So you might want to have, at least in your gift shop, just some little snacks.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't have to be like a full blown restaurant, but just saying, you know, in the gift shop, maybe just some peanuts or something.
I think a good thing to address with that also is we've talked about, we don't want a cafe. We want people to come into town Snoqualmie. But speaking with Black Dog, some of them, maybe the brewery, why not have an espresso stand where you serve Snoqualmie Falls like root beer, maybe a sandwich from Black Dog, something that our well-trained staff can then drive people. That's just down the road. You can walk there. So tying in, growing up here has made it so I really want to support downtown Snoqualmie. So it's kind of a fun thing.
Another thing just kind of related to that is in Leavenworth, they have deals with all the shops where they have each other's stuff hanging up on the walls, driving traffic around. That's something I'd like to encourage in Snoqualmie a little bit more anyway. So I love that idea of selling local stuff there.
Do we make goldfish in Snoqualmie?
We don't make goldfish that I know of.
But to your point, we thought long and hard on how to do this, and not sure how to do it. You gotta, if you got kids coming, you've got to find a place to let them burn off all the energy. I went to the Sacramento Railroad Museum like 6 months ago, and upstairs they have kids there, and it was insanity. I mean, it was super noisy. Some kids were sitting doing nothing, other kids were tearing around on. It's just like, anyway, you got kids, and so
Well,
you got to burn it off somewhere. You don't want to burn it off.
you've got good partnership. My kids were basically raised at the Museum of Flight. When it's raining, it's one of the places you can go to. So it's good you've got that time.
At the train museum, one of the things that's pretty popular with the kids is to just have a couple of tables where they have the trains, Thomas the Train and stuff. They can link them up and smash them into each other. And that's lots of fun.
Oh, I'll donate my old set from my kids.
Perfect. And yeah, that's nice.
I saw your hand.
Yeah, good. I've got a few things to say, so I can wait.
No, I'm okay. Go ahead.
Okay, so I started out thinking, hey, I'll get on the city council to sort of help my community give back a bit, that sort of thing. Along the way, I discovered I'm now a politician, which is not something I ever actually intended to be. But as a politician, I now think about, okay, what happens from here from politicians' perspective? So, but by the way, I want to have every presentation that anyone ever gets about this by you, because everyone walks away thinking, I've got to have that. So
am I getting a better grade?
oh, we gave her a good grade. We gave her a good grade. We just
Getting a
we had
way
to-
better grade than I got yesterday.
So I don't know if this has been shared with you. We did have a discussion at our community development committee, which is a different set of council members, all well, not that different in the sense that,
2 of us.
Councilmember Johnson is the chair of that committee, and I'm on that committee as well. So both of us were actually had some discussion on this. We didn't have this presentation, of course, but we did have a chance to discuss this. So in the process of sort of preparing for and having that meeting, and I don't know if this has been passed on to you already, I have a few things that I think when you use the term we, I don't know who we is in this. It doesn't mean you, it means some we. I think need to address to have this be successful. Or I guess make its best, put its best foot forward. And so I started by just sharing last night with, one of my great disappointments of becoming. So I'm like, it's not state politician. It's just city with 15,000 residents. It's, you know, but turns out politics is politics. So what I learned is that, and this was a great disappointment. I admit I was Pollyanna. I thought if you just explain things well to people, you can get everyone to kind of buy into things. And what I've learned is that's not how it works. So there will be people who will not be in favor of this. So fine, that's the way the world is, not the way we wish it was. So let's just think about then, how do we go through effectively the political process? So the political process is focused on things that people will say that could go wrong with this idea. And they don't mean with you didn't build the trains in the right place, or you didn't put them back together correctly, or, you know, even you didn't have enough goldfish. It'll be, why are we doing this? This is, you know, fundamentally wrong in some manner. Okay. And I don't mean to belittle it. They'll have their reasons and we'll all want to hear those and address those. But here's what I think are, so that leads me to, for this to work well, I think we ought to have a presentation when this comes to the council, which I don't think it's ready to come to the council. I think that would be a big mistake. I think that when it comes to the council, which doesn't have to be a long time from now, I just don't think it's Monday, because I think we need to do some things first. I think we ought to address all the things that we can reasonably expect might come up from residents as concerns, questions, perhaps objections, and people are entitled to their objections, but let's make sure that we haven't teased out an objection that wouldn't have been there had we just communicated something a little better, more thoroughly. So what are the areas I think we ought to, now you guys have this from last night, I know I went over this, but I think there ought to be a presentation that's complementary to this presentation we just had, that talks about sort of these, I'll call them political issues. So broadly viability, which you did touch on, but I think really just talking about it purely from the city's perspective, which is what you alluded to, the off ramps that I think that's Mr. Chambliss' turn. So we've got these off ramps. So you've got a 32 million nut to crack. You've got to solve operating costs as well, although that looks like you've kind of got that. You're pretty comfortable with that. That makes sense, great, but you do have a capital nut to crack, right? So what happens if, and let me just back up, give a little bit additional perspective. That other city, North Bend, that you referred to, did have a problem where it's nothing to do with a museum, but they had a hotel developer come in, and they were going to put up a hotel on a lot that's pretty central in the town, and then something started and then it stopped, and there was a whole eyesore issue, and sort of just so maybe just talking about sort of viability. Here's why you think this is going to work, which you actually touched on a lot of that in this presentation. But if it doesn't, and this, I don't necessarily think this has to be your presentation. I think this could be a presentation by city staff, or we can figure out who. But okay, if things don't go well, then what's going to happen? How do we know we're not going to end up with a lot that we're now sort of is in limbo? How do we know we don't have a building that gets started then sort of stops? I know the answers are, that's not what you do. You don't start before you have the funding. But if we could just address those viability and what happens if something falls through, so to speak, I think that should just, let's put that out up front so someone can't invent, you know, well, this might happen and this other might happen, because we've already sort of addressed now, here's how we know those things, bad outcomes wouldn't happen. Viability, I think we ought to clearly talk about the benefit to the city. And you kind of touched on some of those things now. When we talk about, so I couldn't see the numbers, so I apologize, but I am pretty sure that your numbers included projections of number of visitors. In fact, I think Mr. Chambliss shared those numbers with us last night at the other committee. Yeah. So if we can sort of focus in on a presentation where we just really put forward, this is the number of visitors we're talking about. This is the traffic flow that we're expecting to create, therefore into downtown. As I think you all may know, we best estimate is somewhere close to 2 million visitors a year to Snoqualmie Falls. And we don't believe that we even get 10% of them into downtown, not even 10%. So, but if we could talk about numbers and kind of traffic patterns and why we think they would end up going to downtown, I think that, you know, the benefit to the city really starts to become apparent. But by the way, we do get to have Mr. Johnson's kids get to go to the museum, and I get to go. So that's cool. And I'm a resident here, but I think also just talking about the financial benefit to the city, I think that should be part of what's presented. I think we should talk about alternative uses. Why did we decide that we should endorse this project versus some other project? Well, Mr. Hamlin, you talked about it earlier. Well, there's very limited things that we can do on that lot. And so, but people don't know that. So let's make sure they know that we've said. And so therefore we looked at these uses, and this is why we endorse this use, because compared to everything else, which is basically, if there was something else, I don't think it'd be vacant right now. So, but we have a better way to say that and lay that out for folks. So viability, benefit to the city, alternative uses. And then the last thing I think ought to be part of that discussion is some touching on the tribe's point of view. So as I alluded to earlier, the tribe's perspective on anything to do with railroads is a complex one. So they may be wholeheartedly for this. They may be completely indifferent to it. They may be partially or wholly against it. Whatever it is, that's going to come out. So better to just put that in the presentation. Hey, we have had these consultations. We're not going to try and speak for the tribe, but we should say, here's how we've consulted with the tribe to make sure we've taken into account their input. So I think if we lay those things out, those 4 things in a presentation that's maybe complementary at the same time as this, then I think we've got a real chance for this to be a home run. And then one other thought I have, my recommendation is, and I'm kind of ribbing Councilmember Johnson here a bit on the goldfish comment, because here's the thing. I wrote down some comments that I have about what did I think of your proposal. And at some point I'll share them with you, at which point you can say, great, thanks a lot, that's stupid, or great, we'll think about it, whatever. But they're not. None of them are, well, you won't get my vote if you don't do that. None of them are of that nature. But I would say, I think it would be really smart of us to have a chance for an informal, if you will, discussion. So what I'm thinking is a sort of open house where council members are invited. When we do that, we have to open something like that to the public, and that's fine. That's great. They can watch the presentation. They can watch us have discussions. That's great. Doesn't mean that they're necessarily part of those discussions, but they're entitled to observe those conversations. So, but something informal where we can just sort of kick around goldfish and whatever the heck I've got written down here and whatever the other 5 of us might. I think that way, by the time we get to council meeting where we're actually going to make a vote on this, make a decision, we've really got this laid out well. You've heard whatever little things we're going to say, so you're not sort of in the moment trying to struggle. Okay, I better promise the goldfish, or whatever. Like that you just actually have thoughtful reaction. So my recommendation is, let's put that other presentation together, hitting those points.
All right, so hang on. I have an agenda bill.
Yeah.
It's on the agenda by the CDC committee, on the agenda for next council.
CDC committee did not put it on for next council.
It's coming from this committee.
They're asking this committee to put it on the
That's
agenda.
Community Development Committee, Pacific West Rail Model Train.
Wait, let's look at this. This is the agenda.
Sorry, I'm getting into mechanics of how we
Yeah,
make sausage.
That's what we're worried about now, is how do we get this to sort of move through? It's not, we really don't have issues with what you presented.
said whenever you guys want to.
I'm just about finished with mine and then I'll shut up. Sorry, I just want to get my,
I want to just mention two things
Peter,
real
can
quick.
you move a little closer to the mic?
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
While they're looking at this, real
sorry, let
quick.
me just finish so I
Yeah,
can
go ahead.
shut up. Okay, so my recommendation was I named 4 things I thought ought to be part of that presentation. I think we ought to have that put together so that these come together. And because that council meeting is, you know, where residents will go look to the video, I think let's make the full case, if you will, of why this is a good idea. There's parts that are appropriate for you to make and parts for us appropriate for us to make. So I think do that. And then between now and when that happens, which could be 3 weeks from now, because 1 week from now is the council meeting, 3 weeks is the next council meeting. It could be 3 weeks from now. I'm not talking about a lot of time, but maybe find time within that to do this open house suggestion, because I just think making sure that council members have all had a chance to tell you any thoughts they have, and that sort of, I don't want to get distracted with smallish issues at a meeting where we're trying to make a big decision. So that's my recommendation.
Chair Mayor.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I've got 3 other things I want to make sure that you guys heard now, because I think that they would come up from the public. That location to the public, the vast majority of the public, is just called the tree lot. That's what people will ask. Silly as it may sound, that's what they're going to want to know is, okay, what's going to happen to the trees? So we need to make it clear that we either have an alternative or that there is space on the proposed site for it, one or the other. Second thing is just making it clear that this is a separate entity that is complementary to the Northwest Railway Museum, because people will ask about that. Well, what about the train museum we already have? Up front, confronting that confusion. And then the third thing is this could cause a huge problem if there's any line of sight from the falls. So if you can see the building from the falls, that will be a huge problem. I don't know what to do about that, but just giving you the FYI.
If I could
Yep.
just say, to my knowledge, and I do have some knowledge, which I won't go into right now, but to my knowledge, that is not a concern that the tribe has right now. They are interested in the fact that there's a waterway there and the setbacks, which has been alluded to. So I think that's something of concern to us as well. It's concern to state law. So, but I have not heard that as a concern. And to my understanding, this isn't something that, but I do think Councilmember Johnson's point is well taken, but I just don't think that's an issue, but you should make.
It has been for other things.
For other things.
I'd
just think in
be
this case it
surprised if
won't
that
be.
wasn't a surprise.
No,
an issue.
conceptually, it could be an issue. I'm saying
Right.
they haven't not perceived
Yes,
this as.
that is what I'm getting at, is that you might just want to take a look as a heads up, just to see, land up, could you see it from the falls or not? Because if you could, I think that it could very quickly become a big issue, even if it hasn't been raised yet.
Okay, but the property across the street will never be developed. And
Right.
for that specific
Yes,
reason,
yes.
we've already given buffer
Great.
across the street to address that. To address the tree lot, funding of venture crew is not the responsibility of the city. Having said that,
The
I'm
public's
sure,
gonna care.
I'm sure we can find a way to support it, but it.
The Parks and Public Works Director looks forward to working with the Boy Scouts to find them an alternative.
I'm just saying
We're
the-
just
the-
gonna get them a little.
The
flag
public
hold
will
up.
care.
Okay, but we'll find a place. I mean, I'm not gonna. If this is viewed as the greater benefit, we have the responsibility to do what is in the greater benefit for the community.
And I wouldn't hold this up for that.
Yeah, that's what I'm cautioning.
Fair.
Trying to skirt around it, but that's what I'm cautioning.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm still trying to work mechanics. So let me offer something. And can we do this as a two-parter? In that I would like to introduce it to the rest of the council in the next council meeting, so probably as a presentation. And then the following council, we can have a public workshop or workshop at the start of the agenda or at 6 o'clock. Under which we can go into, I don't think there's not enough homework time to do your stuff between now and next council. Okay, but I'd still like to move the ball forward just a little bit.
I hear you, and I thought long about that as well. I think maybe there's a path to doing something like that, but here's my thought. Sort of a variation on you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. And if something goes out into the public, I mean, this is a public meeting, but it's not as closely watched by the public. But if something goes out into the public where individuals who might have questions, might be opposed, or may just have questions, and a bunch of questions get raised and kicked around on Facebook, and the experts on Facebook answer the question, of course, incorrectly, which leads to more concerns, which further get incorrectly answered. And now, by the time we're doing something, we're fighting just a maelstrom of misinformation and confusion. My thought is, wait 2 weeks and hit this thing a home run. This is such a fantastic project from my perspective. Let's not run the risk of, let's not hurry it by 2 weeks. Okay, granted, I'm redefining it. Let's delay it 2 weeks. I'll say, and just hit a home run with this thing, so that we don't have people sort of getting wrong-footed, and then we got to pull them back onto the right, and think of the delay that would happen then, because politically we're in an election year, people start slowing down when it's all misinformation. Let's just get it right. No, by get it right, that's the wrong word. Let's do it well. Let's do the presentation well.
You're talking about due diligence, homework, really.
That's what I'm talking about.
I'm very much in favor of that. I'll add a couple of things. One is, I guess I'm responsible for pushing this pretty hard, too hard, a quarter ago. And so when I said to Mayor Ross, look, let's extend it 4 months, which is part of the MOU in the first place. What's driving me is obviously we're spending money on small thing, and I love doing it. They're great, and we wouldn't be here without them. But that is a financial clock that's ticking. The other one that's on my mind, I have no experience with this, is I don't want to take the chance we get to November and a few of you guys are replaced, and then we start getting more questions like, well, I wasn't part of this, so what is this all about? So that's part of my motivation to push. And frankly, the first 4 months, I wasn't ready either. So I'm equally comfortable. So I wouldn't, having said that, I wouldn't worry about August 18th, other than I want to keep moving. But I kind of agree with you that it needs to be anticipating all of the arguments we may have from the community, some which many which are legitimate, about why this should be done and what it's going to cause. So for example, on the tree lot, Lori and I came out and bought a tree from the lot for this last Christmas, which is quite comical because it was too big and they cut it short. And when they cut it short, they cut it lopsided, so the whole tree was into our living room. It's great. But in that event, I met with Kim and his wife, and they were very concerned about it, partly because the buzz was this is going to be their last year or something like that. And I said, look, and this is what I'm telling you, we're not going to design this for a Christmas tree lot. But once it's designed for this, I said to them, we'll do everything we can to keep it on that lot. Maybe put them along the back against the trees, whatever it takes. They mentioned something, we need a place to store things, and say, well, we'll help you whatever way we can, reasonably. Then they say, well, we wouldn't need to get a power hookup. You already got power and stuff like that. So my interest is not in pushing this in and saying too bad, whatever is going on here before here. No, quite the contrary, and partly because it's a big community magnet. So people come in, I can still buy Christmas trees here. Hey, what is this thing? We've never seen it before. And they go, or vice versa, they come out and go, we can get a tree here rather than Bellevue. So I guess what I'm saying, I'm very much about doing my homework and having things not shoot from the hip, but really ready to go. However you guys want to do that, it's your call.
Chair, my
Oh, okay,
suggestion
go
is just a 2-week delay. I think 3 weeks from now is enough time to, that I'm not asking for stuff to be done that nobody's thought of. I'm just asking us to pull the thoughts together into a solid presentation. So 3 weeks seems to be plenty. So we're talking about a 2-week, just moving this 2 weeks later. And the upside is maybe we, just avoid noise that might otherwise happen. Noise is the wrong word. Confusion about facts that might otherwise happen.
Okay, and I'm interpreting your comments as 2 weeks is not gonna drive you away. If it's helping to get the better story. Okay, as long as we're moving this forward for you. Mayor Ross, are you still with us?
I am with you and I have my hand up.
Oops, well, I didn't see that. Sorry, but I did want to hear your thoughts on this.
You know, it's not 2 weeks, it's 4 weeks because there's a fifth Monday in there. I don't see the harm of them coming and presenting their project because that would allow other council members to also provide their input. And then they would have 3 weeks to go away and put together the information and also do the special workshop that you suggested. Just delaying it and then find out there's more questions in 4 weeks, that kind of puts them behind the 8 ball. And they also, as they stated, there's a big investment. The longer you wait, the more it's costing them. So I'm not sure, I don't see the harm of the presentation, what they presented to you this evening.
Well, and that's kind of catch the noun presentation, very specific use of noun. At least in my use of it, and I believe Mayor's Ross's, that's not a Q&A session. That is just somebody presenting to council. There may be council questions, but it's not open to the public to question presentation material. Okay. And if we couch it such that this is introduction, we've got homework, we're going to do some other things and come back a next council meeting addressing these other things. Again, at least the rest of the council can see it on the radar, hear some of it, and start to ask their own questions, and it can set us up for that workshop in the council to follow. So go ahead.
So let me make sure I understand what you're suggesting. Because I want to make sure, and I want to make sure if this is the same as what the mayor's thinking. So are we saying we're not going to bring an agenda bill on Monday? So we're not going to try and make a decision. What we're going to do, though, is hear the presentation, perhaps that we heard tonight, which brings all of us up to speed of, okay, last we heard we were here, which was November, whenever that was. Now here's where we are. Got some fantastic drawings, way more developed thoughts about what this building would look like, what would be in it, how it would work, and so on. You're saying present all that, but not try to move to an agenda bill. And then, so in essence, sort of like what we do on ordinances where we do a first read. So it's not exactly first read,
exactly
but present the project, update on the project, and then 2 weeks or whatever the number of weeks later is, that's when we bring the full complimentary presentation and the agenda bill and we make a decision. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I would use different words, but yeah, part of the reason we use agenda bills now for refreshments. So
I get confused, I know.
okay, so there would be an agenda bill, would be a presentation.
Okay. But not an action item.
But not an action item to actually approve the lease agreement, which is what the agenda bill is in the current package.
Right.
That would come in the council following with additional information added to address, to flesh out some of those questions you have. And others may have.
And perhaps we would have if they decide to do this, have that sort of open house or whatever. I called it open house, but something
upfront.
where we try to sort of, to Mayor's point, you don't want to get to that point and then have more questions. So we try to flush out those questions early so that we are all in a position by that decision date to hopefully make a decision. Is that we
So
would,
are-
if something like that happened, it would
Are you
happen between now and
discussing,
then.
well, are you discussing a third meeting somewhere between the two councils?
No, it's talking, well, it's sort of an informal, more informal, not a council meeting,
We
more. of
can't
a-
meet informally. The
We can't if we
attorney-
public
attorney
no-
will tell you,
yeah,
we can't meet
if we public no-
informally.
All we have to
You
do
could have a
is
round
notice it.
table.
All you have to do is notice it.
Oh, peace, it's still, it's gotta be noticed and
Yeah.
it's still, okay.
You just notice it.
Uh,
But I just want to make sure the mayor's thinking like this, or does she have a different thought?
Mayor Ross, what do you think?
I think that's what we're exactly looking at. So next week would be a presentation. And then no action, but council can ask questions and then so that we know where everyone's thinking, and then they can go away and we put together information for the next, I guess, council meeting. However, if you want to have like a special workshop to have further discussion, you can do that maybe the hour before the next.
So that's kind of what I was fussing out there was, I believe the suggestion is that we've got a fifth week coming up, that there be a workshop open house sometime during that fifth week. To get some more community engagement, to go through a little more detail of this. I'm ruining 3 of your nights. I apologize for that. Trying to help you out. So somewhere during that first week, we have an open house workshop for council discussion of the project understanding, and also again, keep focus around the lease agreement. It's our near-term decision. So we have that fifth week, and then the week following thereabouts, we have council in which we can further flesh it out, but then take action on to agree or disagree upon the lease agreement. Does that sound like a plan forward?
Chair, if I may.
No.
No.
Go ahead.
You're the chair. So one of the things that we oftentimes do council meetings is we have presentations at the very beginning, and those usually don't have agenda bills for them. It's just a presentation from so-and-so. And that might also help them with staffing if they weren't sitting around waiting for F&A committee to have an agenda bill where then they would present. So they could just present at the very start of the meeting.
Well, and
Yeah.
that's what we're proposing for next council.
But it wouldn't need to have an
We have
agenda,
lately been doing agenda bills for presentations.
even for the present. Okay, fair enough.
I don't know if we do that for this one or not.
Whatever administration needs to do
I
about that.
really don't care the mechanism to do it. It's just, the discussion is next council presentation, similar to what we saw right here. Don't really want to have somebody try to kill themselves to answer all those questions, the homework questions between now and next week.
Because let's not do that halfway.
Yeah,
Let's bring it when
let's
we're
wait,
ready.
wait for that for later discussion. Give me a second. And then sometime during that fifth week, we have a workshop open house. Not only to
Whatever
discuss
we
the lease
call it, yeah.
agreement, yeah, well, somebody who has better English than I can pick the title. I don't care. But the intent is community engagement, further engagement with the council, some information that we may have worked up in the meantime, get that discussion. So do that hour and a half meeting in the fifth week. And then the next council following, again, catch up any questions, any further information, and take action in regards to the lease. And that would be first week thereabouts in August. Be August 7th, if I got that right.
The next FNA is on the 8th,
The next first council in August would be
14th.
14th, so it'd be the 14th. You had your hand up.
Clarifying question. I've heard roundtable, I've heard open house. My mind's already off and running. Would you like to have an open house that we invite the public to, that the council's also invited to, that's less formal, where we can have actual, we can print up some of the stuff, put it on cards, have some set pieces, and actually engage in conversation about this? Or do you want it a little more formal, where the council is asking questions and making comments on the ideas as they stand and have been presented?
Councilor Mayhew.
My idea was, the purpose was solely to allow, well, I think they've already heard from mayor but to allow them to hear from this group, to hear from 7 council members, whatever ideas, concerns they have. So that, yeah, I'm trying to speak to the point the mayor brought up. I had the same concern, which is we get to the meeting and then a bunch of concerns come up then that hadn't come up, yet we're trying to take action that night. That can be problematic. So the goal of this meeting is simply to get 7 council members to come just chat with these folks. I'm really think sort of an informal setting. So could be this room, but we just have some chairs in a circle or something. I don't know. But just a chat. The point is, if 7 of us are together, we have to allow the public to come in.
So I'm envisioning now more of a workshop format. A council retreat format.
You have nothing so formal, just some, we just have these guys here. We have the 7 council members here, and then any members of the public that want to come in and just watch what's going on, fine. But that's it.
Understand.
It's maybe half an hour to an hour, but what it means is when we actually come to take action on, I guess it's August 14th, all concerns have been raised that council members have, and these folks have had a chance to think through their responses to those. Now, probably just like tonight, some of the questions council members will have, they'll just answer on the spot. Great, done. Some they may say, you know what, we'll get back to you on that. Fine, great. Here's what we're gonna do with tree lot, or here's what we're gonna do about goldfish, whatever. But that's really my goal there. So it's not, I'm not looking for some public engagement. I mean, it's fine for the public to be there, but in fact, we must have them there, but, or at least open to them. I'm just saying the purpose is just let the 7 council members get anything on the table with these folks. So this thing is ready to go by the 14th.
Got it.
Are you thinking July 31st then? That's the 5th Monday.
I think when we have the discussion about the discussion in the next council meeting, let's poll the council and see what days they're available. It's just during that week sometime. I'm not particular which day. And you should be part of that, of what days you can support, what days you can't support. You probably get the most vote on what day of the week that is.
Doesn't work very well without you.
And I don't have visibility if there's any SVGA meetings or whatever that week. If we have to worry. Okay, cool.
When you say 5th week, what's the 5th week?
We're on we operate on a 2-week cycle.
Yeah.
Week 1, we have committee meetings. Week 2, we have council meetings, which works great until you do the math and realize, oops, you have some extra weeks in a year. So it turns out certain months don't have 4 weeks, they have 5. So we just refer to that as, so what
You really
generally,
consider it Mondays. If there's 5 Mondays in a month, we don't meet that week of the last Monday.
so just so
One
happens,
night off.
so just so happens that's happening here in July.
Okay, is that it's clear as mud?
Clear as mud.
All right, so presentation next week. Workshop following week. Next council will come back with the lease agreement and any further discussion. Okay. Cool. Thank you for your stuff tonight.
If you can put as council member
Johnson.
no, thank you, Mitch, if you could put us on first, that'd be great. I'll be in Chelan. I'll come back for this and then go back to Chelan that night.
You can watch us do it in about 5 minutes. We're about to
We're
approve
about
the
to do the
agenda.
agenda. We'll have to do the Pledge of Allegiance. We can do up there.
Yeah.
All right.
Comes on my mind.
Matter of fact, with that, I believe. I'll take it back to the beginning.
Oh,
Stop.
sorry, I do remember, Chair. I was just going to say that I don't see any need for this to have discussion at the next FNA meeting. We'll have had all the discussion necessary. I mean, we'll have to approve it going on the council agenda for the 14th, but I don't think there's any need for them to come. Do you?
No, I think we'll have most of the,
It'll all get dealt with
well.
either
get
on
dealt with in
Monday
the
or at that-
midterm, and it's- it's
whatever we're calling it.
really, F and A involvement is at this moment is constrained around the lease agreement. So, yeah.
Yeah, good.
To the extent, and you council members can, and with the city can fuel us with questions, ideas about where things might come up and what, and we can prepare for it, like in these presentations, be great. We can anticipate much of that, I think, particularly since these guys are local, so.
Growing up here helps me understand when it was a town of 1,800 people when in 85 when I was born, the changes and how those changes affect people. I get it.
It's a whole new town.
The other thing I want to mention is, I've made it very clear to Mayor Ross and the other city staff, and hopefully to you guys well, that whatever we do with the tribe, we do through you. That you're the ones who have that relationship. And as such, the more you can help us understand how to extend olive branch, how to help them, well, not welcome, but maybe tolerate what we want to do, including, like today it came up, we were talking with this very gifted artist, Andy Eccleshaw, who did all the scenery backdrop. And he's worked with the Tulalip tribe to put up a big, he's a gifted artist and did a big mural. Not for them, it was for,
There was a 95-year-old gentleman who grew up in Edmonds who said that,
that's right.
there's no story of before, I don't know what year it was, but basically the Native Americans were underrepresented. So he worked with a tribal, I believe an artist, and he spent 3 hours at one of their museums for the Tulalips. And he worked alongside him because he said, I can't do this. I need to have somebody that understands this.
So that's another element to this project, which would be very meaningful to me if we could do something in this museum that not just honored them, but they were happy to see. If you ever get to Edmonds, you really should see what Andy did on the walls of these two buildings on Alley. One of them is, if you look at this mural, it's what Edmonds looked like before any civilization arrived. And if you look at the other wall, it's what the water, the sound looked like before any of that arrived. It's really cool. They're huge. They're about 50 feet tall. And he's a very gifted fellow. But anyway, that said, if you could help us understand how to bridge that gap a little bit, it'd be great.
Okay, we will. And yeah, and we'll talk to you after this on some of that. Okay. With that, let's move to council agenda, which will occur next week. We'll do roll call, order, pledge of allegiance, approval of agenda, and then we'll move right into public hearings, presentation, proclamations, appointments. And we should move presentations probably on top.
If we
in
could do,
consideration.
Chair, if we could move presentations on top and if we could pull the model train, so I guess that's AB 23097. Okay.
Start from the top. work
Ah,
the way down.
gotcha. All right. Jumped ahead, sorry.
All right, yeah, so if we move presentations top of the public hearing, the presentation and proclamations portions. Have in there the model train museum. We'll have public comments. From there, we'll move on to public comments for items not on the agenda. Consent agenda will be approval of minutes, approval of claims, and also approval of the Purcell contract for the stairways as discussed in Parks and Public Works. There will move into committee reports, public safety. We'll have the ILA with Echo Glen Children's. For community development, we will remove agenda bill AB 23097 in its current format. I don't know if you want to redo that agenda, that number, whatever, but we'll have the lease agreement at some other time, or next council after that. All right. And Parks and Public Works, although it says in here, build design or design build contract, that will not be on the next agenda, so we'll move that out. Agenda bill AB 230XX. Finance Administration Committee will have a report to council, first quarter financial report, as we saw here earlier. Committee of the whole, no current items. We'll do mayor's report, committee liaison reports, council reports, executive session as required in adjournment. I would like back on appointments, one council liaison position change I need to make. Yes,
Um,
ma'am.
Also, the, under Public Safety Committee, they had the ILA with Echo Glen was consent.
I'm sorry, the ILA with,
Echo Glen.
yeah, I said that. I'm
Oh.
sorry, I may have been going
Oh.
quickly. But yeah, they've got the ILA coming in as part of Public Safety Committee.
It's on the consent.
Consent. They approved it to consent. They just had a chance to update this.
Okay, I'm gonna pull it off, but okay. Echo Glen is enough concern. I'm not doing consent on it.
Chair.
Yeah.
If I may, would the FNA committee like us to bring back the first quarter 2023 financial report with some edits based on your feedback before going to the city council?
Go ahead.
So in the past, my recollection is we have not done a presentation of the financial report to the full council. We've informed them that it is now available. Because I think once it's finalized, you post it on the website. So we tell them, look, it's available. If you have any questions, let administration know or let FNA know. But I don't think in the past we've had them present that to the full. And I think it'd be fine if they didn't. And then as regards to the specific question, I think it'd be great to just kind of do a little back and forth now and try and kind of improve this report. If that makes sense to others.
So your past experience was a different council.
True.
So I would like the exposure of this council to that quarterly report.
Good. I
But
agree.
I don't want to pull the bread out before it's baked. So if you guys want to take some of the feedback from tonight and redo that, and then not this council, but the next council, bring that back in and do the presentation with the new material.
Or next FNA, I guess they'd come back with here's a.
Yeah,
revised-
Next FNA and then the council
Yeah.
to follow progress.
I'm amenable to that if you're okay with it.
As the experts, we want to make sure that you're satisfied, right, with what you see in front of you before we take it to the full council. So we want to make sure that.
Okay,
you guys
so let's
are
bring it
happy.
back to FNA and then go to the next council. So please take the first quarter presentation off the agenda for next council. We'll have it in the council. Well,
FNA next.
bring it to
next
FNA and decide which council from there.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right, are we good with the agenda then as discussed?
Yeah, so the primary. So I'm just looking at the. So this is great. Because we do have time for this month. This is great. Yeah, I like where we're gonna go. Well, no, I.
Why do I feel like I just sold you a car that I told you the little old lady drove it?
You look great.
You look good. All right, so agenda approved as discussed. Hopefully you caught us as we rambled on through that.
Hopefully.
Okay. All right, any other items to come before the committee tonight?
Sorry, just one question.
Go ahead.
So if we do have any comments regarding the two agreements regarding the model train, the draft agreements that are being worked through that were included in the agenda packet, we should bring those comments. You'd like to hear them soon, Mr. Chambliss, or you'd like us to bring them to the next FNA, or what would you like?
You can transmit them to me sooner.
Okay.
That'd be awesome. If you want to bring them to that next FNA also, that's good too. Something comes to you between. But yes, we are actively working on now. So the sooner I get things, the better
Got
we
it.
can respond.
So let's do that. Yeah.
Let's do that. All right. With that, I'll move to adjournment. Any objections to adjourning? No objections, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.